tried to come up here before. She had train tickets. It was a snow day, so we're trying for Monday. And she'll be here to give a presentation for anybody who's interested in going to the New York studio for the summer. I know we have one student who went there last year for the summer. And it was an excellent experience. Anyway, she'll be here on Monday and talking in 307, Clint 307 at 12 o'clock. So if you're interested in doing something in New York, either for the summer or if you're a junior and are looking for maybe a semester-long experience, that's an option also. Second thing is we have a party tomorrow night, or tomorrow afternoon, with LG, who is she's a graduate of our program and has just launched a little boutique up here in the Emporium. So if anybody's interested in supporting that, I have little handouts. Yes?
I'll take one.
Okay. Okay. Who wants to go? Okay. Anybody else? Okay. Anyway, you can come up afterwards and pick some of these up as well. Okay, today we have our second speaker, who is Dr. Marian Goldsmith. She doesn't have her name up there, but it's on the Sakai site. It's M-A-R-I-A-N, and Goldsmith, like you would think that is spelled. She's a professor here at the University of Rhode Island in biology and has been a department chair for many years, recently released from that.
Not as many as
Some
in this room.
Okay. We're having a lot of free time with all our committee work. Yeah. Anyway, she has a BA from the University of Rochester, a PhD from the University of Pennsylvania, and she did a 4-year postdoc at Harvard where she got into the whole silkworm research that has extended through most of her career here at URI. Many years ago, when our gallery first opened, we had an exhibition on silk, and we actually installed some silkworms that we would feed every day with the mulberry leaves, courtesy of Dr. Goldsmith. So she will be telling us about silk and the silkworm, which is, of course, the most luxurious fiber.
Well, thank you.
Welcome.
And thank you very much for inviting me and also for your listening. Now, I know you're not supposed to do this, but I'm going to do some disclaimers. First of all, I am a geneticist and a molecular biologist. So as a textile person, I've been a groupie ever since I got into the silkworm, but in a way, it's not really my world. And the other thing to say is that, like many faculty here, I'm trying to catch up with the snowstorms. So let's just say it's not an entirely polished presentation. I figure we'll see how it goes. Anyway, and I also want to attribute a couple of colleagues. Some of these slides, as a result, many of these slides are mine, but they're from talks on silkworm genetics, silkworm molecular biology, and I kind of worked them in. Many of them are from a colleague in India who has passed away, but who was a wonderful head of a silk research lab there and knew the silk industry in India very well, and you'll see some of his slides. And many are from a colleague who was a textile chemist, Mary Becker, and she worked at Smithsonian in conservation, and I met her in Japan when she was working at a research lab there. And she kindly gave me some slides on silk production in Japan, which I'm going to show you because they're a good illustration of what the environment is like. So it's a kind of myth. All right. So here's my aim here is to talk about what is silk, where does it come from, what is it made of, how is it processed, and where is it going. Some of these questions I'll answer more thoroughly than others, and I'll just say all along, if people have questions later, I have a ton of research articles, especially on the modern stuff, and if people want me to send, put them on Sakai or something, just say that I'm here. So, Okay, the origins of silk. The origins of silk were somewhere in China about 3,000 years ago, 5,000 years ago actually. And there's a legend, a famous legend of Empress Xiling Shi, who's also known as Lei Su, and she apparently she was sitting in her garden and there was a mulberry tree. You hear this many times. It's the only food of the silkworms, or the main food. and a cocoon fell into her teacup, and she saw the cocoon thread unraveling. And of course, it's a legend, but said, boy, this would be great for imperial fabrics. And in fact, the silkworm, silk and mulberry became a national secret for about 3,000 years on the pain of death of exporting cocoons or seeds. The Asians called the egg seeds, or even mulberry. We can talk more about how they got out, but I just thought it was a kind of good start for this presentation. Oops, came up the wrong way. And silk did spread from China to Japan and Korea, first in the Far East, and then India into Central Asia, across the Silk Road, then into Constantinople, and I've forgotten the dates, I forgot to look them up, but someone here may know them, and finally into Europe. And actually one of my great experiences was to spend a sabbatical and also another summer in Lyon, France, which for a long time was the center of the silk industry in Europe. And that industry, you may know, went downhill because of some disease. And it was a disease called pebrine that was transmitted from the mother moth to the eggs. And so once they got infection, they didn't know what was causing it at the time. Once the eggs got infected, the silkworms were very sick. And Pasteur, who was working on the biological theory of disease, discovered what it was, and it wasn't in time to really solve it. But that's kind of a famous aspect of sericulture, silkworm story history. In any case, I should say this now. I mean, I haven't practiced this, so there are different things I'll pull in at different times. But the result of having silk all over the world like this is a living insect, and I'll show you the insect and talk a little bit about what's special about it. And as each country and area had their own silkworm stocks, genetically they began inbreeding them. They acquired certain selected characteristics that we still know about today. So there are so-called Japanese strains, Chinese strains, European strains, and even more subdivisions like that sort of geographic strains. And these are sort of like breeds of dogs. So if you work with them, you recognize that the larvae look a certain way, the cocoons are a certain size, the life cycle is a little longer or a little shorter, the disease resistance, and so forth. So as a result of this spreading across the continents, there really was some genetic changes in these animals, and people have taken advantage of these different qualities in developing their local silk industries. Okay, so what is silk? Well, silk is a proteinaceous fiber, I'll go into a little more into it later, which are produced actually by many animals, but the most famous and the most well-known and the most widespread are in the arthropods. And they are used for many functions. So I just have a couple of illustrations, and the spider will come back later. But this is a orb-weaving spider. I don't have a pointer, but you can see the clip. And that's, of course, famous for making silk. And actually, spiders on the side, spiders make many kinds of silk. They're chemically different. Their physical properties are different. And that's a hot topic among people who are interested in this kind of species. What's the basis of that? But some of them have been exploited. And another example is this caddisfly, which is an evolutionary relative of moths and butterflies. And they use silk to hold. The larvae live in streams, or at least some of them, and they use silk to hold little pebbles and things together to make a small tube to live in. And that's the one thing I forgot to wear. Someone who's an ecologist gave me a pair of earrings that are made from the caddisfly homes. And this artist takes different fancy colored pebbles or semi-precious stones and gets the insects to glue it together for her. And then she says she teases the insect out and it doesn't hurt it, and then they make others. So silks are used for many, just to illustrate, they're used for many purposes besides the ones we use for textiles. But the ones we know best for textiles are the ones made by the Lepidoptera, moths and butterflies. And that's kind of my bag of seeds. So Lepidoptera is the second most numerous kind of insect. about maybe 170,000 species. And if anyone's interested in that taxonomy, I can speak more authoritatively about that than some of the other things. But among the moths, and so most of them do make some silk, most of these. But they don't always make elaborate cocoons. And the ones that make these elaborate cocoons, and by the way, I have cocoons here. I was asked to bring some from you all. We'll pass them around at the end, and you can pick what you like. I also have some little novelties made from cocoons besides textiles. But there are two classes of moths that make silk, and many of them, several of them are exploited commercially for textiles. And this is a slide from my colleague Nagaraju. And you can see the first two names, or maybe you can't see, but the first two are the one I'm going to talk about, most domesticated silk lines. And it's relative. You'll see plenty of those. These are images of what we call wild silk moths, or saturnid moths, and they are found all over the world. We have some local ones. Antheret polyphemus, the second on the bottom, on the right, is a oak silkworm. We have it, but the numbers have gone way, and that's when I worked on it as a postdoc actually. But the numbers have gone way down because when someone released a parasitic fly to get rid of gypsy moths, it turned out these guys were a target too. Some of you may have also heard, it's not seen here, but it's a cropia moth. It's another wild silk moth, and I'm sure most of you know about Luna moth. Luna moth is in the same family. But these guys, these other ones that are pictured here, poly is not really very viable for making silk, but a lot of the other ones have been used, mostly in China and India, and they've been semi-domesticated so that they can tolerate close rearing, large mass rearing, and they've been selected like farm animals for their productivity, for their ability to live in crowding, for their the yield of silk and things like that. So, and Antheret yamamai, second from the right on the top, is very famous in Japan. It makes a colored silk. It's a beautiful sort of a blue-green color. And you'll see pictures of colored silks, or you see these. Those are not light fast, and they leave the cocoon when you process the cocoon. But yamamai silk is embedded in the silk fiber, and it's probably the costliest silk in the world because it's not really these are not as amenable to mass rearing as the domesticated one. So it's really quite special. Thousands of yen per pound or per gram. So this is an example of some of the wild silk moth cocoons, and you can see they're kind of rough. That bottom one I think is maybe muga silk, but these are they're not provided me with some pictures. You can see they kind of look like leaves. They're well camouflaged. These guys mostly live in the wild, and the cultivation can even be in the wild. It used to be, I don't know now, but tribals used to go out into, find the trees that was their food source, and then certain people would be delegated to guard the trees and keep pests away, keep predators away, and rear them out, away from good culture conditions. Nowadays, I'm not sure. I'm not really up on that, but here's a couple of examples of wild silk that's used commercially. A lot of it in India, but of course my slides from but some in Japan and China. So Tassa silk comes from different kinds of Antherea, wild silk moths, and it looks a little bit like it's not as uniform, it's not as smooth, it's not as glistening, and the original is kind of brownish, but you can see it makes a lovely textile. Airy silk is another one. It's a different genus. But again, those are kind of white. You can see how fuzzy they are and loose. This is a sample of the thread. And usually, you see those fabrics, and they're just a little coarser. They're coarser, and the thread is not as uniform. But the classic is my bug, Bombyx mori, the mulberry silkworm. And the key word here is it's been domesticated. So I will say a little bit about that. This is the very beginning of cocoon spinning, and you'll see more of it. But it's enclosing itself in a cocoon to protect itself in the next stage of its metamorphosis from predators, from lots of things, from UV light, from infection, things like that, as it goes through its next stage. Here's an example also from some of the ranges of colors and shapes and sizes you get from this mulberry silk moth, Bombyx mori. And these are, so what's going on here? There's a lot of genetics involved here, and we don't know all the genetic basis, but we know when you do breeding studies, you can see how some of these traits are inherited to different generations. The pigment colors, there are two classes of pigments. One of them, and again, I'm kind of out of order, but their main food is mulberry. And the yellow colors come from carotenoids in the mulberry leaf. So that's like in carrots, the yellow pigment. The greenish colors, the second row, these first two are technically greenish. I have greenish here. They come from flavonoids. So there are two different classes of pigments in the leaves. And what's going on in the larva is that the genetics relates to things like, do they absorb it? Do they absorb the pigment through their gut? Does it get and you'll see pictures of the silk gland. Do they get transmitted into the gland that's making the silk? Each one of these is a kind of genetic barrier. Do they convert the pigment from one color into another biochemically in their own body? So there's a whole, it all has to do with silkworm physiology and development. And some of the genes are known now, and I didn't throw in slides on this, but one of the yellows is quite famous because the gene that is involved in that particular process, which is a carrier, pigment carrier, is in the white ones, it's knocked out. You can see that the gene itself is defective, so it has mutated into something that doesn't transmit the pigment. Well, it doesn't hurt the larva, but that's or the silkworm. The yellow one is still capable of taking the pigment in from the leaves and incorporating it into the silk. The pinks are part of those categories. And the green is really interesting because that pigment, someone has worked on that. Those pigments have been tough to study because the physical characters are there are multiple genes involved, and you can't always tell the difference between light green and dark green, and they're not really good ways of measuring when you look at your offspring from your matings. But one lab in Japan has succeeded in doing it, and it turns out that this stuff, this green one, has UV protective abilities. So he tested larvae that had been exposed in green versus not green cocoons that were doped with this pigment, and found the ones that had the green were more resistant to UV. And that's kind of cool because it means, they're making their cocoons out in the world, and if they're exposed to sunlight during this 2-week period when they're transforming, it could be quite harmful. So there's more in that cocoon than silk. I'm going to mostly talk about silk, but there are also some antibacterial substances in the cocoon. I don't know the mechanism of that, but probably it's known now. So there's quite a lot going on in this protective shell that this insect has produced to go on the next stage of its life cycle.